Hi, in this video we're going to wrap up everything we've just learnt about in the previous four, and we're going to really focus on what we've been learning about in this first unit, looking at the establishment of the Nazi dictatorship. Now, this unit is the first of 5 that we're going to cover in this course looking at living under Nazi rule, and Unit 1 covers Hitler and the Nazi Party in January of 33, establishing the dictatorship, January of 33 to July of 33, and achieving total power, July 33 to August 34. And if you've been watching the previous 4 videos, you should have by now covered this. We started looking at Nazi ideology. We also will have looked at Nazi leadership in 1933. In the third video, we looked at the Reichstag fire and how that enabled Hitler to remove the communists. We looked at the creation of the Enabling Act and how that enabled Hitler and the Nazis to remove German democracy. And we looked at Gleichschaltung, bringing the Germans into line. In the 4th video, we looked at how Hitler and the Nazi Party achieved total power from July of 33 to August of 34. We looked at this event called the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler got the SS to remove the threat from the SA and the threat from the conservative politicians. And then finally we looked at the death of Hindenburg in that video. If you're unsure about any of those things that are on the right hand side, I'd stop this video right now and I'd go back and watch the others. If you're happy that you understand what all of those things are, please keep watching. Now, this first unit really is the story of Hitler and the Nazi Party, and it's really bookended by 2 events. The unit starts in January of 1933, which is that picture there, where Hitler is made Chancellor of Germany. At that point, Germany was a democracy. Fast forward the story on a little bit to August of 1934, and it's really important we remember this is a year and a half, and at that point Hitler is Führer, or leader of Germany. Germany's a complete dictatorship, no democracy, no real threats to his power. Now, the really big historical debate here, and the big historical question, is why is Hitler able to make that change so quickly? We're talking a year and a half where you go from democracy to dictatorship. And so the big question is, why is he able to make that change so quickly? If you want to, probably a really good opportunity now would be to stop this video and jot down any of those big factors that you can think about that enabled Hitler and the Nazi Party to make that change from democracy to dictatorship so quickly. What big factors can you think of? Pause the video now, make a few notes. Right, let's keep going. Now, the sort of question that the exam board are going to ask you about this is exactly around this point about how and why were they able to make that change so quickly. This is an example of the sort of question that OCR might ask you. Hitler's position of total power by August of 34 was achieved mainly through the use of violence. So one of those big factors that I'm sure you've just dotted down was violence. So was it violence that enabled Hitler to take Germany from a democracy to dictatorship? Now, there's a lot of evidence to prove that it was violence, but there's also a lot of evidence to prove that there were other factors. And with an 18-mark question like this, it's really easy in terms of structure. Obviously, you have one paragraph or one section that looks at total power was achieved through violence. A section or paragraph that agrees with this essay question above. You also need a section or a paragraph that obviously is the other side of the argument. In this case, there wasn't any power wasn't achieved through violence, it was other factors. Now again, it's probably a really good opportunity here. Pause this video, see if you can note down any evidence for either side of the argument. Can you think of any evidence that total power was achieved through violence? And can you think of any evidence that it wasn't achieved through violence? Feel free, pause it now, copy out this little essay plan, add in your points. Now you should have done your essay plan by now. I'm going to give you some points that I think are the most important here. Now if you remember, an 18 marker for OCR, you only really need 4 points. I'm going to give you 5, and you can decide which one of those you'd like to get rid of. So firstly, let's go through some evidence that power was achieved through violence. To me, there are two really big points you can make. Certainly the Night of the Long Knives, where the SS murdered the SA leadership and murdered some of the conservative politicians, is a clear example of Hitler taking power through violence. It's the best example of this. But we could also say and argue that the use of the SA and the SS to intimidate the German people through Gleichschaltung was also an example of him intimidating the German people into suppression through violence. Things like the book burning or the boycott of the Jewish shops are really clear examples to me of violence being used to scare the German people into submission. But there's also some evidence that actually that total power was not achieved through violence. I think you could really easily argue that actually one of the reasons why Hitler was able to take power without violence was luck. The Reichstag fire burning down was incredibly lucky for the Nazis. I'm not a massive conspiracy theorist, so I'm not convinced that actually the Nazis did try and burn it down themselves. I think it was just something where they were very lucky to have a big event that they could use in the way that they did to remove the communists. Also really important that you consider law or legislation. There were some really important legal documents, some laws that were made by the Reichstag that enabled Hitler and the Nazis to take loads more power. The most important of those by far was the Enabling Act, which meant Hitler and the Nazi Party could make any law they wanted without the Reichstag. But there are lots of other laws as well. For example, the Act to ban new parties meant they were the only party. You could also argue as well that the appeal of Nazi ideology and the charisma of the leaders at the time of the crisis meant actually that the German people wanted them to take more power. Now, if I was going to look at these 5 pieces of evidence, I can only write about 4. I might knock out that last 5th. So then I end up with an essay with these 2 points on one side and those 2 on the other. And I think it would be a really good opportunity at this point to stop and write that essay out. And remember, the essay needs a brief introduction where you give your judgment about the question. So do you think violence was more important than not violence? You have 1 paragraph or section on how total power was achieved through violence, 1 paragraph or section on how it was not achieved through violence, and then a conclusion where you try and give your clinching argument where you weigh everything up. There's no right or wrong answer here either. Some historians do believe that total power was achieved through violence. Other people emphasise the other factors. So it's entirely up to you. See what you can do with an essay.